Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get
Welcome, ladies and
ourselves
gentlemen,
a
to the
treat.
Double Feature Podcast, where every week me and David bring two movies together, try and find that perfect pairing, try and find that perfect movie marathon, the perfect way to kill a weekend, the perfect double feature. David, how are you?
Similar to how we left off last week, I will say, quite impressed with one of our entries this week. The other one, I was more excited for it than I was after it. But at the same time, I can't disparage it because I think there's fair takeaways from it. But one of these blows the other out of the water, that's for sure.
Oh, you were hard on the line that one of these movies is gold, one is trash.
Not so much trash. I mean, some trash is pretty like a piece of tinfoil that shines in the sun. But yeah,
Very, very artistic.
we'll certainly have a one-sided discussion today, I think.
Possibly.
Hmm.
Well, to continue on, for those who don't know, this theme month is foreign films. So we were going through all the fun little things of foreign films. Our first week, was last week, which was Mexico. And we had a really good discussion about the two movies last week. But this week, oh buddy, we get to be as pretentious as possible because we're in French territory, right? And for those who don't know, French films are the most pretentious of films. David, am I wrong here?
No, this is if there were two film students or one now former film student, congratulations again, for graduating to ultimate stuck up in this, we could probably say.
Finally, my film snob card is in the mail, boys.
Yeah, and you deserve it rightfully so, because if there was a pairing of films that we could have chosen aside from the poster boys of the French New Wave, I don't know,
Breathless,
maybe
400 blows,
yeah, maybe it's even more snobbish that we chose two movies that not a whole lot of people will ever have heard of or may ever hear of again.
Okay, well, I'm just saying, like, Elevator to the Gallows, I'll give you that. I think Elevator to the Gallows, you gotta be like real film nerd to know. Like, that's your gatekeeper check right there. Do you know Elevator to the Gallows? Then you're cool. All right, you get into the club. Hiroshima, Amour, that movie's lauded as one of the best films ever made. It's in a lot of the AFI. Oh, it's fascinating, David. Is somebody
Yeah.
having a crisis of faith now?
Well, I think cat's out of the bag. Elevator to the Gallows, in summation, was quite exhilarating and full of drama. Hiroshima Mon Amour, if you're in the mood to watch a couple of lovers talk about a lot of different things and kind of with a little bit of perspective, having been so separated from the events in which they are referencing, you can see how the film is a little bit pretentious in the way it talks about a mass murder event and heartbreak. Yeah, it's kind of a weird comparison that the film certainly leans on, and I think there's something there, but I don't know if it holds up. Visually, though,
Well,
yeah, I could see how the actual film part of the film is one of my favorites that I've ever seen. I love some of the visuals that come out of this movie and how kind of the French New Wave's known for this, but being kind of ahead of its time, some might say.
yeah. Oh, and for those who may not have caught it, we're talking about Elevator to the Gallows and Hiroshima Mon Amour, two films that are
Yes.
at kind of the start of the French New Wave, the West Bank film movement, all that stuff, which kind of got its start around the mid to late 50s, but really blew up in the 60s, early 60s with François Truffaut and Jean-Luc Godard. But our directors today are Alain Resnais
Ooh.
and Luis Meli. I have butchered both them
Ooh,
fucking
yeah.
names, by the
Alain
way.
René and Louis Mal. Much simpler than you thought it was going to be.
Totally. Like, look, I took French in high school, so I'm like, oh, I can speak the French, oui oui. But like, nah, like my French is piss fucking poor. I
Yeah.
know enough not to get stabbed on the bus. That is the limit to my French. But on that note,
I've never known
we
a
actually
French person to stab somebody on the bus.
not yet. But yeah, so these two movies, they're 58 and 59 respectively, and I feel like 59 with 400 Blows, that's where French New Wave kind of kicks off, right? In full
Yeah.
force.
I
But,
would say so. Yeah.
you know, since this is the French thing, these are French New Wave movies, and we're pretentious people. You want to talk about the French New Wave for a couple minutes on our intro, real quick? How these movies fit in?
Yeah. It's kind of an interesting. It's the poster child for film waves. There's several different ones that happen around the globe. Anything from Iran to Italy has their own, which we will be talking a bit about next week. Um, Japan has their own version of not really a wave, but kind of like a
A
couple
film
famous,
movement.
yeah, a famous director. Brazil has one eventually, but the France,
Germany has a big one in the 80s. America has one in the
that's that too.
70s.
And even you could even say like there's a German movement that comes out earlier than this. That the German expressionism movement and all that, but the French one is kind of the biggest, most well-known one because it went on to inspire the Americans to get up off their ass and stop making boring movies. um,
They were
it
not all boring. I like
it was.
westerns.
I feel like culturally, it's one that Americans identify the most with because partially it was inspired by the film noir movement that came out of America, which in itself was kind of inspired by that German expressionism movement. The whole things are connected if you look through history. Crazy,
Yeah,
but yeah, I mean these two are kind of at the beginning, like you said, with that onset of 400 blows, and kind of, I feel like people talk about these couple of years more than they do the actual movement that comes afterward.
mm.
Um, One of these films, Hiroshima and Amour, is part of that left bank, like you were saying last week, that is much more poetic, I guess you could put it. Um,
It's a lot more
whereas,
interested in the very avant-garde artistic expression of film,
yeah,
whereas the other facets of the French New Wave, again, I ain't gonna lie, everybody, we are paring down a lot of very long criticism of French New Wave because I think it's the most written about film movement in history.
yeah,
So we're paring a lot of shit down. But yeah, the left bank is kind of a weird, like, we're doing weird artsy shit. And then the other parts of the film movement were more like, we're making noir movies that talk about humanity kind of thing. Those are the other ones in broad brushstrokes.
yeah, you're about right. I think the main difference in what I've studied from it is it kind of seems like that left bank was about being experimental and exploring the art of film, whereas the opposite, which doesn't really have a name, I guess. There's just like the left bank and the other guys. Although
Yeah.
the other guys are the ones who are the most popular, so go figure.
They're the Cacheux du Cinema people. They're the ones who work for the film magazine, right?
Oh yeah, Cahiers de Cinema. Yeah, or worked, written for, written about that kind of thing. Um, but yeah, they were a little bit more commercially successful. They focused a little bit more on kind of like Elevator the Gallows being dramatic rather than just creative totally. Although they
Mhm.
still had their fair share of like non-linear narrative and things like this.
If you've
It,
ever
it's
seen a
still
Jean-Luc Godard movie, you know what non-linear editing becomes, cuz I don't think Jean-Luc Godard knows how to cut chronological order. I don't think that exists in his work.
yeah. I think a lot of people would remember the Jean-Luc Godard movie Pulp Fiction as the most famous example of non-linear
Yeah,
narrative.
very
Yeah,
very much.
but yeah, I mean, so there's kind of a difference there. There's a lot of these things tend to happen throughout history. People interpret a movement in different ways, but I think we've picked a couple that kind of represent both sides in certain ways. Maybe not de facto, but certainly there's elements of both in them, and I certainly think that we'll be able to explore the movement deeply that way, on top of praising Elevator to the Gallows, which I'm coming right out of the gate and saying that was my favorite of the week, and I thank Dean for recommending it.
I mean, Elevator to the Gallows is a banging movie.
Yeah,
Out of these two movies, only one of them has a soundtrack done by the musical genius Miles Davis.
love
Just
that
saying,
trumpet.
you know. He recorded the whole like score in like one night.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it was something like the director asked him to do it, and he was like, "Yeah, I guess." And then went and did it, and then was like, "Did you like that?" And he was like, "Okay."
Yeah, like they were like, "Yo, come to the thing." Miles Davis watched the movie once and he was like, "Okay, I got it." And then just called the band up and he's like, "Okay, guys, from the top, follow me." And just did it in one go and then fucking left. Like that's some shit, dude.
But
But
that's
there you go.
kind of in the spirit of the movement. I think jazz shares some similarity in that there's kind of variations throughout the time of like more experimental progressive jazz as well as the more
Mhm.
traditional big band or Dixieland. But I think here, I think, well, I'll save it for when we get to discussing each in their respect. I guess before we get going, I'll give everybody the quick rundown.
Yeah, give us the elevator pitch, give us the log lines.
Right, loglines for this week are: a businessman murders his boss, or his mistress's husband, but gets stuck in an elevator after leaving the key evidence behind, forcing his mistress to wander the streets after she spots his car with a girl hanging out of it, but not the hoodlum who stole it. Opposite of that, we have a Japanese architect and a French actress spend a few more days together before she returns to Paris. His wife returns, talking about absolutely nothing at all, but also everything at the same time. It's one of the most confusing films I've ever tried to follow, other than just watch.
Oh, is this your brick wall of what the fuck's going on art movie?
Listen, I mean, I could follow it, right? It's not, they're not going on these long tangents of uh, tough to follow information. It's not a sci-fi movie. It's not a uh,
It's not Eraserhead, right? It's not like David Lynch is dropping some acid and just making a movie kind of thing.
yeah, it's kind of trippy, but it's all they're really talking about at the end of it is character backstories and love. That's basically the two things you get out of this movie. Is there's a current relationship going on, and then there's the backstories of the two characters, and that's most of what goes on in the movie. There's a couple moments in which we get some. I don't want to call them action sequences, but moments of action, and well, that's about it. Other than that, beautiful visuals.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Well, a lot of the movie for me, like, well, I guess most of the plot reflects on the fact that these guys or these two characters are reflecting on World War II, and Hiroshima and the bombing of Hiroshima in particular,
hmm,
where the Japanese architect, I'm gonna find his name because I should know this, Louis,
yeah,
right? Huh.
yeah, the
And
characters' names just stand for, ironically, she and he or him and her.
oh,
So it's kind of like they, they're as close to being unnamed characters as you can get.
gotcha. So the dude, since he's Japanese, he is reflecting on the bombing of Hiroshima, which was his hometown, and kind of like the death of his family. And the woman, the girl, the lady, she's reflecting on her time in France during the war and how she was ostracized for having an affair with a German soldier.
It was kind of like her first love, Like
That's
she
what it
was a
was.
young woman, and then he was a German soldier. This kind of story exists in World War II history, where the Germans or another nationality are in their country of occupation, and then having to come across the farm girl, or in this case, a girl in town. Hilarity ensues.
Which, as you do, as you do.
Yeah.
But yeah, so a lot of the movie for me is just a lot more of them reflecting on like the war, which World War II is a big part of like the reasoning why the French New Wave exists. Granted, most of it exists like what 15 years after.
Yeah, as I remember it, it was apparently that there was kind of an embargo, not an embargo per se. It was basically hard for the market to procure domestic films that were about much more than like reruns of what was going on in America.
Yeah,
The market was dry, we'll say, and boring. And then,
and
directors come together at Cahiers de Cinema, they start writing about film, and eventually some of those directors decide, well, let's just do it ourselves, and they make a few films that were apparently really good. They went
yeah,
to the Cannes Film Festival and stirred things up. But it was kind of ironic because some of them were noir films that kind of stole from those films that they thought were boring, or at
yeah.
least the ones they didn't think were boring.
Well, a lot of it is I guess for historical context, like right, because France, Paris, all that stuff. That was a country that was ravaged after World War II. Like the
Mm.
film industry was gone because the studios were like blown the fuck up. Like just there wasn't a film industry after the war because that shit was just gone.
There wasn't any industry.
There wasn't any industry anymore. And then it took like a couple of years for them to get anything going again. And then also the release of like now you can have like a handheld camera was a big get because then all these young filmmakers could just get a camera and film a movie with like their friends instead of having to
Sounds like
spend
something we have going on today.
it's similar, right? After big
Yeah,
giant political
anyway.
events, film movements happen. Look into it. It's history. But yeah, and that's this movie, and it's very explicit that it's analyzing, World War II and Hiroshima and all that. I mean, the director, Alan Rene, he
Yeah.
directed the arguably the greatest film about the Holocaust ever made. I believe it's called Night and Fog. I watched it not too long ago, and it is gut wrenching. But yeah, and then they approach him to make a movie about Hiroshima, and then he's like halfway through, and he's like, you know what? Let's make this a fiction movie instead of a documentary, and then we get this movie. There you go, historical context.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because the screenplay being written by at the time was France's most famous woman novelist.
Mm-hmm.
I did a school report on her, so that's why I will know so much. It's not particularly something I'm dying to get my hands on the internet. But her expertise is mostly in movies or novels that have to do a lot with like forbidden love, kind of memories of formative experiences with love. A very risque author, but certainly with the intent of like pushing boundaries of what was normally accepted at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Also, kind of interesting too, because one of her most famous novels has to do with a woman losing her virginity in French French Indonesia at the time,
Mm-hmm.
whenever the novel takes place in the early 20th century. So I find it interesting that there's kind of like a similar thing going on here with like a mixed race relationship. There's some interesting themes going on here. Now, could they have talked about something else in the movie? Yeah, it probably couldn't have got a little bit more interesting that way.
Okay, so I got the question for you, because I'll agree with you. I like the visuals in the movie a lot more than the story being told, but I can groove with the story enough. Like,
Yeah,
I guess it's a thing where it's just like the actors are fine enough to where I can be engaged in their conversation. but like where did it lose you? Like, was it like a plot thing? Was it a performance thing? Was it like just a subject matter thing? Like you just did not care at all that they were talking about their past and their love life? Like if they were talking about something else, would you be into? I'm kind of
Well,
curious.
so let's put it this way: the first 15 minutes of the film, like you said, is practically a documentary. It's a lot of archival footage, photos. The main character is talking over most of it, talking about what the horrific events of the bomb dropping and everything. And it goes, 15 minutes when you're first getting into a movie is a long time. In the
Yeah.
middle of a movie, 15 minutes may be a few scenes. It doesn't really phase you. But that first 15 minutes is an eternity if you don't know what's going on. And not that
Hmm.
I didn't know what's going on, but I was sitting there kind of waiting for something else to happen. And especially knowing it's a love story, when we finally get to the two lovers, I was like, okay, here we go. We're gonna start getting into the heartbreaking or whatever's gonna happen. And the setup becomes she has to go back to Paris after a film, and she's kind of want to leave it there. There's something between them, but she wants to leave it. She's maybe afraid to pursue it, whereas he wants to pursue it, and that's fine. I'm like, okay, maybe that's what's going to go on. Then we learn that he has a wife that he took after returning to Hiroshima, and I'm like, okay, that's an obstacle. What are they going to do about it? Well, they don't do much about it other than talk about it. And that's, I think, where it started to lose me is I'm sitting there like, I want action to happen that does more than just talk about why they can't be together. Show
Hmm.
me why they can't be together. You know what I mean?
I'm picking up what you're throwing down because like I will admit that this movie is only talking.
Yeah.
There's not much else in this movie at all. Like, granted, I'm not saying every movie needs to be a car chase. Like, there are films like Dinner with Andre, where it's just a conversation for like 90 minutes. There's movies where there's just talking and there's not a lot of like, you know, gunfights and sword fights, whatever. But yeah, it is kind of a point that the movie repeats the same conversation a lot, right? Like it feels like they're having it's not one long conversation that drifts and moves and changes and evolves kind of thing where it's like, oh, they're getting deeper and deeper into this meaning and thematic yada yada yada. It's kind of like they're just repeating the same question and they're just rephrasing their answers over and over again.
Yeah, a little bit. The only thing that really changes is we eventually learn a little bit more about the character backstories. And that was fairly interesting because it was, again, some extra information with some extra visuals. They do show our main character, Elle, in her tragic state as she is locked in a cellar or something like this after
After the
falling in
town
love.
people Yeah, after the town people figure out about her and the German soldier and they kind of that was like a thing in World War II, right? Where they would like shave women's heads and like ostracize them from the community if they like slept around with German soldiers.
Yeah, it's the classic kind of Scarlet Letter situation where somebody who's ostracized for being different sexually in some way, shape, or form uh, is branded and punished in all this. And I'm not saying either that I needed cutaways constantly because that would just make the movie confusing.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's a few thoughts I have about what I wish this movie was, rather than just what it is. I wish in some ways that they would have some action that pursues the story along with it, and then maybe come to a little bit more of a resolution, one way or the other. I don't mean that it needs to be happily ever after. It could be tragic if it needs to be tragic. I mean, if we're referencing Hiroshima, it can't be pretty feel good at the end.
Yeah, you're not going to get a heartwarming thing out of that.
Yeah, and opposite of that, there's a couple of movies that I think that you know this is like it reminds me of maybe like the Before trilogy.
Mhm.
A lot of talking, but even still, we're exploring a relationship between two people, and it's very passionate. And this movie has passion. I'm not going to say it doesn't, but just as well, I think at the end of the day, this is kind of a story ahead of its time.
Mhm.
In that, I mean, the visuals, aside from them doing the new things, like you said, being able to handheld the camera and kind of like move it smoothly through spaces and outdoor places. And there were some things that I was like, oh yeah, for the time, that's pretty. I don't want to say incredible because it's like I've seen Thanos punch a hole in the wall or whatever on
Yeah.
screen, but
It's ahead
you
of
know,
its time for 1959.
yeah. And then I think aside from that, this is one of those things where maybe on the theme of the characters like forgetting each other or forgetting their former loves, um, this is one of those things that needed maybe special effects or something to kind of poetically make up for what they're talking about for 45 minutes.
Okay. So okay, because I don't know if I have a strong opinion about this movie one way or the other. I'm gonna be real. I'm an
Sure.
opinionated asshole. If anybody's ever met me, I have an opinion on everything. This movie, I'm not. I don't want to say I'm lukewarm on it because I liked it. I liked it, but I didn't like love it, and I don't know if that's blasphemy or not. Because this seems like one of those golden gooses of like film history study, all that stuff. Because you are right. It feels like the story is ahead of its time. If this feels like a story that if it was made, I almost want to say even 10 years later, it would have felt like ahead of its time. Right? If instead of being made in like 59, it was made in 69, like it right before, Hollywood New Wave come up and like all that change in storytelling, maybe even the 90s as a postmodern film, or even beyond that. Like if this movie came out, a couple of decades later, I feel it would fit in a lot better than it being in 59. But I will concede to you that it feels like they know that they're telling this story, and the way they're telling it, they know isn't traditional film. And I don't know if they're handling it perfectly, but I give them credit for handling it as well as they are.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to sum it up. I don't know. I think I'd be mostly interested in like why Renee decided to take it from documentary into this love story, because I think one of the other things that I mean, like you said, I don't have like a strong opinion on it either way. I'm not trying to bash it. It's just that I don't really understand, maybe there's something different culturally about the time, but I don't know if I understand the whole a romantic relationship is anything like 80,000 or 200,000, I think is what they listed, people dying in like 8 seconds.
Yeah.
It seems like a lot, like a huge jump in comparison. The Never
Well,
story, I think, was a little bit more easy to understand
mm,
why that was comparable to whatever the relationship is going on. But yeah, I mean, I don't know.
I want. Are we missing the point? We might be missing the point of the movie, right? Because I feel like the point of the movie is it's less to do with them being in love and more to do with how they remember the war, and like how that trauma has like permeated their like sense of self.
I did get a little bit at the end. I was thinking about this while I was watching this, that maybe there's a lot of it just has to do with an exploration of like could have beens. I could have been with this German boy that I only met because of war, that even if I had never known, I would have had other love. And this other guy's like, I had people die in the bombing while I was away, and I only came back. I strongly suspected he took a wife because it was only societally like what he was supposed to do, and that
Mm.
maybe he wasn't quite ready to love it. I think there's things like that going on that I enjoy that theme. It's just that I don't know. Again, it's one of those things. I think we've explored this before. all the all the right questions are there, and it got me to think about them. It's just none of it translates to the action. You know what I'm saying? Like I think we found this in Y Tu Mama Tambien, where
Mm.
their action is exploring all of the themes as well as the dialogue is, but I don't get that out of this.
Okay, yeah. Honestly, comparing this to Y Tu Mama Tambien feels interesting because I will admit that I think this might come down to the fact is how we qualify action in film, right? Because I think when a lot of people hear action, they think like a Schwarzenegger flick, like Terminator,
Yeah.
Predator, whatever. Where a lot of it is like, no, just characters doing things that are affecting the world around them.
I guess plot is how people would normally put it.
Yeah, the plotting in this movie is a little sus, right? Like are the characters actually affecting their world, or are they just drifting through it? I wonder, is that why you're not digging? Is because the characters just don't do anything about their predicament or their station in life or their trauma? Like I don't think these characters evolve at the end of the movie. I don't feel they are different from the beginning than at the end. This feels like we're just following people for 90 minutes and just like spying on their private life.
Yeah, and I there was something you said a second ago that I was like totally about to agree with, but I just
And then
had
I
a brain
kept
fart.
talking.
No, I mean I think yeah. It was that the characters are passive, and that they're not really affecting the world. I guess the idea of an act. Here's an example of something I think I should have seen in a movie that I didn't. That maybe doesn't correctly line up with like the theme of why I enjoyed the movie, but still would like add something to it to get me interested, to like pull me into it. Kind of the
Mhm.
way the elevator of the Gallows does. He talks about his wife and how she's coming home in a few days. And even if it's just not, if it's not a visual cue, if it's a dialogue cue, which is much more passive, I'm sitting there thinking, oh, that's some conflict that I'm waiting for now to like resolve, but it doesn't. And even if there was some sort of like, okay, here's the main action of the film is let's see if this love works. Let's see if together we want to stay together. I'll stay in Hiroshima instead of going back to Paris. You tell your wife that you have something to do for a week. Let's stay in the city and see if we can work this out. And then if when all love goes lost or if everything kicks off like rockets, I'll go back to Paris with you or we'll go apart forever. I think that would have been a much more interesting way to explore it. Like then we could have gotten things like sequences where maybe his wife sees them together in town or things like this. But I know then again, that doesn't really fall in line with the whole could have beens and romanticizations about bombings and things like this.
Yeah, like I get what you're going for, and it feels like you just want it almost feels like you want the film to be more traditional in its approach of its main story, right?
Yeah, and
But I feel like the movie doesn't care about that. I think it just cares about exploring the trauma of like the war. And I feel like it being a love story is almost it's almost superfluous to what it's trying to talk about. Right? Granted, I think that's a problem where your movie is about a theme and not about
yeah,
characters
yeah.
when it's 90 fucking minutes.
Yeah, and in Foreign Film Month, of course, we're gonna run into this where I'm sitting here like, if anybody was to make a movie like this nowadays, it'd be panned. And I don't even think in America necessarily. Like in most situations, a film that's 90% dialogue is just not going to be very popular. Um, Now, opposite of that too, you saying they don't care. Of course, they don't care because these people were. I kind of had this thought the other day. I was thinking about like, well, film geniuses that we've revered today didn't really know what they were doing at the time. They were just they knew how to figure something out, or maybe they didn't, and they just have a good taste for what they want. You know, I don't think they were necessarily looking for this thing to be 90 minutes of dialogue. It's just that these are the things that they felt like talking about in the movie, or Alan Renee as a writer, and then Margaret Duras as the writer. I'm sorry, Alan Renee the director. Um, and it just comes together to be this. I mean, who knows? I mean, the more and more I delve into this like spiral of what I wish I saw in this movie, the more and more I start to understand the forgotten loves of Hiroshima and Never. I don't know, because
Yeah.
opposite of this too, I watched this after Elevator to the Gallows, and Elevator to the Gallows got my blood pumping.
You played the classic where you started with the movie that had like story, narrative, plot, character, and then you went to the weird art movie.
Yeah, and I
Classic mistake,
maybe
man.
it could have been the other way around. I don't know. I mean, I guess on that note, if unless you have much else to say about this, I guess we could talk about the visuals for a moment, because it's something we
Yeah,
keep talking about, but we're only really saying that they're great. Um,
very pretty film.
Pretty film.
There's some shots and some sequences in this movie that are
Yeah.
absolutely amazing, and some of the documentary bits are absolutely horrifying. It's playing both ends of
Yeah.
the emotional spectrum in terms of its visuals. There's also like really cool symbolic stuff. Like one of the earliest shots in the movie, actually, the opening sequence where you have the lovers are embracing and they're being rained on by like all the ash, which is like these characters being drenched in the past
Yeah.
of like Hiroshima, and it's all intercut with all this documentary footage, and it's like, oh, this is so tragic. And then you see them embrace, and it's like the ash basically dissolves into the sweat on their bodies, and it's this really beautifully done sequence. And then we get to like the talking, and there's a lot of talking, and then like 30 minutes after talking, we get another really cool sequence and all the flashback stuff. There's like a lot of good gems in this movie. Like I can see why this movie was so influential.
Yeah. Certainly. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the more experimental sequences, I really enjoy some of just the camera floating through the streets of Hiroshima, looking up at the neon, looking up at the architecture. Um, Camera movements are what I always take away from this, and that I just like we've talked about this before, where films kind of pre this era are very stagnant. Cameras set in a place, and then things go on, and then it's moved to a different place. But this is, I think, one of the on the timeline earliest films that I think about when I think about a
Mm.
camera becoming a part of the film and moving through it and having action. One of my another one of my favorites being like even just seeing the camera in that like tourist bus in the middle of the movie, and you don't look outside and see rear projection.
Oh yeah, you see real
It is
streets.
one of those things where I'm like, because it looks a little. I don't know if like the frame rate was played with at all. It seemed like a little faster than 24, but I don't know. I really like how crisp the account of that time is.
It's very documentarian in that way.
Yeah, yeah, I guess so.
But yeah,
Maybe now that I think about it, it could have been recycled footage that he didn't even intend to be a part of a narrative.
it
But
happens. But yeah,
yeah,
I think overall the movie's like good. It's a very good, very solid artistic film. There's a reason it won an Oscar. There's a reason it's, very lauded. I feel like just for us it might have just been a little might not aged super well, possibly.
it belongs in a different time,
Yeah.
probably.
Well, with that, why don't we talk about our next movie? A movie that
Hmm.
transcends time and is like, man, this soundtrack is untouchable. And then there's also a movie attached to it, which is awesome. So yeah, next we'll talk about Elevator to the Gallows right after this.
Dean, I found a great way for us to do something cool and to make a little money on the side.
Ah, great. I've been looking for a new place to put my money. What do you got?
No investment needed. In fact, it's super easy, and there's creation tools we can use to record our podcast right from the phone or computer.
Wait, why would you record a podcast on your phone? You want? No, never mind. Where do I put my money for this?
I don't need any of your money. We can even get our podcast distributed to big streaming platforms like Spotify and Google Podcasts.
Oh, I get it now. We're talking big business here, okay? So you're going to need a lot of money from me. How much money are we talking here?
No, definitely don't need any of your money. In fact, we can make money from the podcast with no minimum listenership.
Okay. Now I think I'm getting what you're going at here. We need to spend money to make money, so we're talking some big gains here. Big gains.
No, definitely no. I don't need any of your money. Just all we need to make a podcast right in one place.
Okay. So what you're telling me is that you're going to need a pretty big check from me for this podcast. So do Do I just make it out to cash? Because it's no problem for me. I'll just write it up right now.
No. Listen, Dean, just head over to anchor.fm and check it out. You'll see why Anchor is the best place for us to record, edit, and distribute our podcasts. And I definitely do not need any of your money.
Shut up and take my money. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the second half of our double feature this week of our French film extravaganza. Now we are talking about Elevator to the Gallows. So, David, this movie. You seem to really enjoy this movie. I dropped my phone. But this movie, which doesn't drop its phone, it's Stone Cold classic. So yeah,
it was kind of hard to drop that phone. It was attached to a payphone booth. Yeah, this is a different example of a good film from this era in that, for some reason, people a part of the French New Wave just really know how to get your heart rate up.
There's a lot of nice action beats, nice suspense beats, and the movie still feels like it's saying something about human nature a little bit, which is why the French New Wave is just real good shit.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, I would call this less pretentious. The whole premise of the movie being a little bit more simple to set up. A man is going to kill his boss because he's going to run away with the boss's wife, and he completes the murder, which, I mean, for a second, because I didn't know much about this film going into it, for a second, I was like, is this some sort of secret spy shit? Because he has a grappling hook, and it's all set up to time and everything. It's he really planned this thing out. I mean, it seems a little bit more than just a lover's quarrel.
Yeah. Well, you find out he was a badass, right? Badass war dude.
Yeah, and that does make sense, I guess, now that I think about it. I think overall, too, there's this long and interesting B story that goes along with it that kind of, I don't want to say parallels the A story, but it has a lot of the same stuff going on. Kind of a conflict between two, I don't want to call them lovers because that kid was kind of a dick, but
the boyfriend and the girl.
Yeah, Louis, I think is his name.
Yeah. Honestly, I like that B story. That's actually kind of a nice B story, even though he is kind of a dick. He is the definition of a hoodlum.
And it's very unconventional. You mentioned this in our last discussion, but very unconventional from what we would see today. But at the same time, I think is the right kind of unconventional. Because going back to that setup too, the film kicks off when our main character sees that he forgot his trusty grappling hook on the roof of the building where he just killed a man, which kind of seems like a detail you would want to remember.
Somebody was calling him at the office, man. He had to run. He had to run.
Yeah. So he runs back inside to grab the evidence, only then to find out that apparently elevators get shut off at 4 or 5 p.m. in the afternoon.
Well, the security guard's
fine. I mean, I get it.
Well, the security guard's shutting down for the day, and I guess that's a thing, because I work at a place, it doesn't have elevators, but we shut off, the main breakers at the end of the day, and it shuts off the whole building. So I can see why the elevator would, that would be connected, because I think the security guard does a lap of the building, and Julian sneaks in and gets on the elevator, and that's when the power gets cut. Yeah. But yeah, so he gets trapped in the elevator. Trying to make this movie make sense. Trying to defend it a little bit.
Well, I'm not. Listen, I don't know nothing about 1960s French electric grids and how they're supposed to be upkept by the routine maintenance and taking care of switching things on and off. So I can't say that it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that
shit happens.
Yeah. Anyway, so he gets stuck in the elevator, and this kind of B story happens because there's a couple of crazy kids, one of which apparently knows this guy. It has a little crush on him. They steal his car.
He left the keys in it. What? Come on.
Yeah, it just seems like kind of a capital offense. Though again, the boy Louis, total hoodlum, and kind of a dick.
It happens. It happens.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that that makes me not like the story. I'm saying it's just like, well, he gets what's coming to him, uh, which is fine. He still does some quite interesting things. Uh, I don't know if we want to go through a whole rundown of the plot, but basically all I'm saying is, yeah, all of the setups are good. It all comes organically from kind of a okay, what next kind of
Yeah.
thing. Not totally like improv, but at the very least, I'm sitting there like, yeah, that's a possibility, and if anything, it just kind of like ramps up the drama that we got going
And
on
there's
here.
so much like drama in this movie also. So that whole thing where so the Louis and Veronica they steal Julian's car and they drive off, and Florence, the wife of the man Julian murdered and the woman that's having the affair and all that, sees the car drive past the cafe they're supposed to meet at, and she doesn't see the driver, but she sees this young girl in the car, and then Florence is like, "Oh no, is Julian running out on me? Am I gonna have to go back to my horrible fucking husband?" And then it's just that downward spiral of her just wandering through Paris, just distraught, looking for Julian.
The French New Wave
And then
happens.
the French New Wave happens when Miles Davis kicks in, and you just see the beauty of Paris in like the 1950s in
Yeah.
beautiful black and white. I could watch that sequence of her wandering around France to Miles Davis forever. That shit is amazing.
Yeah, it's kind of the same way I felt about a lot of those sequences in Hiroshima and Amour. It's very beautiful. There's an emotional aesthetic to it that you can kind of get lost in for the sequence. Um, but the funny thing about it is it just makes sense. I mean, it isn't one of those things that's just kind of placed there for artistic
Mm-hmm.
value. I think it really does make sense at the end of the day. I mean, what you get is the exact emotion anybody would feel after they've told somebody to murder their husband, and it turns out that person ran away with the flower girl. Like, yeah, I bet all of us would roam the streets of. Well, I don't know if I would roam the streets of Los Angeles, but
That seems a little more
I don't know
dangerous,
if I.
but whatever.
Yeah, I also don't know if I would run away with the flower or be mad that somebody ran away with the flower girl, but go
It
figure.
happens.
Um, yeah, I mean, one thing I will say about this movie is it felt a lot. I don't know why I had this thought from the beginning. I feel like they could do this movie in some way, shape, or form nowadays, and it would be really good.
You think this story translates real well? Because that's another question.
Yeah, I don't know if it's that.
So out of like our little pretentious hats and stuff and the questions we ask, because this is something that's kind of interesting because with Y Tu Mama Tambien and Chronos, those were released. I mean, not contemporarily. One was released in 2001, one was released in the 90s, but they were released far closer to modern filmic ideology and standards, right? Where these are
Yeah.
really old, really formative. Do you think so? You think if they released Elevator to the Gallows as like almost a one for one remake today, same basic plot, just update tech and whatnot, you think it would still play?
Yeah, I mean, because of the basic idea that like what the film is based on is thrill and drama, not just trying to be poetic.
Mm.
And I feel like, yeah, a lot of what we get out of thrillers nowadays is Dwayne the Rock Johnson scaling a skyscraper while an earthquake happens and he's trying to get on the helicopter that's running out of fuel.
Well, yeah, but that's your
But
favorite movie, so I don't know.
people also love thrillers like, well, there was a popular Netflix TV series, You, which is very much based on being a thriller based on love and relationships, albeit quite out there and violent and psychotic versions of that. But I would say that there's similar levels of drama. Tell me that you couldn't stick Sam Rockwell in an elevator while, oh, I don't know, Natalie Portman roams the street of Paris after seeing who's another person? Help me cast
Oh,
this
okay.
theme.
You see, okay. She sees Alex Holland, the young Spider-Man, driving off with uh
Tom Holland, that is,
Tom
I think.
Holland. Yeah, Tom Holland driving off with Mila Kunis or whatever.
A little
A
younger.
little younger
Mila
Mila
Kunis
Kunis.
is in her 40s.
Fucking really? Oh my god. Yeah, that 70s show was like in 2000. Jesus Christ. Huh.
Yeah, but I
But
like that opposite of that. Him maybe a.
come on.
This is a good question. Young actresses, go.
Chloe Grace Moran, Kick-Ass, the girl from Kick-Ass, Hit Girl, do that. She was in Carrie, the really bad remake, but
Yeah,
whatever.
maybe. Something like this. Either way, you tell me that people wouldn't watch that movie, and whether or not it comes out on streaming. Because the other half of this movie that's also good, just as well as that the opposite movie does this well. It's just a quick hour and a half. It's not 2 hours 45 minutes of. Don't get me
Exploration
wrong.
of art, right?
I love The Departed when we watched it, but still, it's long in the tooth after a while. Sometimes an hour and a half is just perfect snack size for a movie.
That's a question, okay? Because I think we've had this conversation before with other movies, especially for our Pearl Harbor episode, when we
Yeah.
argued that there's a point where movies should not access that time frame. So, do you think like movies should know that like 2 hours is basically the cutoff for normal people? Right? Like very few
Uh,
movies I think deserve the 3+ hour runtime. Granted,
that's a good way to
you know,
that's a good way to put it. Is that a movie has to deserve more than 2 hours of your time? Um, I go as far to say, as a lot of people argue, that people don't have attention spans for that. No, I do think that movies don't do a good job of keeping your attention for 2 hours sometimes, and that you kind of need to earn that up from an audience through things other than bad dialogue and kind of corny action. Uh, which I'm not saying that any of the dialogue in this movie either is quite over the top impressive. There's some funny lines. It's a lot of short stuff.
mhm.
It's a fairly quiet movie. Um, but at the same time, it's like I get a lot. There, you if Grand Theft Auto to fraud, technically impersonation, I guess. I don't know.
He,
Maybe that's part of the fraud.
yeah.
To murder,
hmm And then
to suicide.
yeah, and then framing somebody for a murder that they cannot
Yeah.
argue that they didn't do because that will reveal that they actually did another murder. Also, I love that like double jeopardy #gotcha moment where Julian is gonna have to take the fall for Louis and Veronica because he can't admit it wasn't him because then they'll know he killed Simon.
Yeah.
Oh,
That was actually something that also kept me going in the middle of the movie. I got the stakes from the immediate moment, even though the main character isn't very much a part of the movie until like the last half hour.
Mhm.
I get the stakes of like he can't call for help because then people will know he will have killed this guy. He can't, there's another part of it where it's like he can't.
he can't call for help. He
What?
can't really escape. That elevator's a tomb.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit more third person than what I can describe for just him, but it was one of those things where I'm caught between he either says he did it, or he says he doesn't do it, and then gets caught for the whole, other one. I think it's just all the building blocks come together very well. If you're gonna set up something, pay it off, and this movie has plenty of payoff, I think.
Yes. And the acting in this movie is fantastic. I think everybody in
Yeah,
this
I would
movie is
say
great.
so.
So, I kind of want to know. Okay, so with Hiroshima Mon Amour, we talked a lot about themes, and that movie, there's a lot of things that are going on. We kind of just circled around some stuff. So, but this movie, I
Mm,
feel it has a very concrete theme of like confinement and like being trapped. Because we have Julian who's physically trapped. He's trapped in the elevator. We have Florence who is in fear that she's going to be trapped in that marriage because she thinks Julian ran off. We have the whole thing of like Louis and Veronica. They feel, trapped because they're young, they're kids. They're trapped in like that societal thing of what they want to do, and they rebel. Well, Louis rebels, steals the car to try and break out of that confinement of society, and it's really interesting, right? And then the police are bringing them in at the end and like putting them back into that confinement of that interrogation room with the beautiful like silhouette photography. That one, it's great. Watch that sequence again. But yeah, but I feel like a lot of the themes of this movie are like confinement and entrapment, things like that. Am I offbeat here, or do you got an idea what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I think you're right on the money. I mean, I guess because it was such an action-based film, I wasn't so much focused on the theme, but I think it's the same thing where it's like, yeah, it's just as a similar question with Hiroshima Mon Amour is like it asks all the right questions, but only executes them in kind of dialogue and passive visuals. This movie executes all that in all the visual it can, all of the action, all the props. Because the other thing I kind of like when thinking about entrapment is the camera is such a simple seed that is actually the most important part of the film.
Mm-hmm.
The camera holds the literal evidence as linking both of these two to the murder of
Oh, that's right.
the
Yeah.
husband. Which, like you said, the final sequence of the film pays off in a quite beautiful way. But you could even go as far as to say like it's doomed from the start because of the entrapment, because those photos are stuck in the camera, and if you're going to reveal the evidence of another thing that could get you off, well, it's gonna prove that you're guilty for this other thing. I just think it's one of those things too, where it's kind of like love is messy. Maybe is another
Mm-hmm.
not so defined theme of the film, in that it's not something to play with. That these characters are very much so trying to, or that maybe at one point in their lives aren't so serious about, and that comes back to bite them. A lot of things coming back to bite people in this movie.
Yeah, it's kind of what goes around comes around, and I think that's just the beauty of like the script in this film, because
Yeah,
the writing in this movie feels so tight. It feels like
very tight.
everything's set up in the first 20 minutes of the movie, has a payoff, has a build up, payoff right at the end, and it comes at just the right time. The dialogue is great. What little dialogue there's not a lot of dialogue in the movie, but all of it. But I think that works for its benefit, because only the characters only say what's necessary and not to fill up the runtime, and it still is a tight 90 minutes. This movie's fantastic.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I like that a lot of the setup camera, or like those two witnesses that are in the opposite motel of the Germans, um, are really just like the tiniest plants. They make a moment in the film when they're first introduced, but then come back to be very important parts of it. I just like that the camera was never. I kind of thought about this. The camera was never like focused in on an object, saying like, "You need to remember this," because I'm bad at filmmaking. It was just like we're gonna make mention
The
of it. It's gonna
classic,
be on cam.
the classic thing
Yeah,
of we're gonna do a close up of everything that's important,
which is a fair thing. I
and
mean,
just yell at the audience, remember this shit.
yeah, like the Coen brothers are very famous for their cutaways. This is an important part of their visual language. But even then, like what they do with the cutaway is we're gonna look at, this is a famous one from Big Lebowski. You're gonna hand me your foot, and you'll see that I have painted my nails green, and then we're gonna send you like a toe in the mail later, and we'll notice that the toenail is green. The thing you're noticing in the cutaway is a small detail of which isn't the one truly being referenced by the dialogue or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of stuff in like modern movies and television where it's like, we're gonna look at the shovel and we're gonna show you the blood on the shovel because we know you're too stupid to remember that.
You seem so angry right now.
Well, because it's just like it makes for lazy, maybe, you know. I get it. Not everyone has to be a head scratcher, but I do like that this movie isn't a head scratcher, and that the camera shows up on screen. They make note that it was in the glove box, and if you had a half a brain, you could figure out, oh yeah, if they had an affair, they've been in his car once or twice, and if that camera's in there,
There's evidence that they had the affair.
I thought much more risque things were going to be on the camera, but yeah.
Just them going at it? Like, what do you
Well,
mean?
they're French, you know?
Well, there you go. Yeah, God, I could talk about this movie forever. This movie is wonderful. I'm really
Very
glad
important.
I'm really glad I suggested this movie for our French film week. Thank you, French class
Yeah.
that I took in college. Yeah, they made me watch this movie. It was great.
Very fantastic.
So yeah, do you have any other big points you want to talk before we get to our kind of wrap up discussion and get our little pretentious hats on to talk about?
Aside from the fact that I loved some of the little pieces of humor in Elevator of the Gallows,
Mhm.
you know, there one of my favorite lines is, I'm not gonna be able to quote it verbatim, but the guy that she meets in that bar that was like a friend
Mhm.
of the business owner and a friend of the main character.
Julian, yeah.
He's at the police station with her, and she's going, or they're going over everything that he's been framed for. In kind of a sleepy state, he's just like, "Yeah, real good job. You screwed the pooch on that one." I think that's one of my favorite kind of little comedic things in the movie. Very subtle,
Yeah.
but I like the cynicism.
I like that. The cynicism of the movie is
Yeah.
great, and it's just my favorite little like thing of their, like the weird like comedy, the dark comedy that's in here is when Veronica and Louis try to commit like suicide by downing all the sleeping pills, and then they find out that they just like downed like fucking baby aspirin or some shit.
Yeah. That was another, especially when she comes in and like scolds them for it. Yeah, it's very funny.
It's
Yeah.
good. It's good.
Yeah.
But yeah, this movie's got a little bit of everything. A little bit of funny, lots of drama, a little bit of love, lots of murder and crime stuff. But yeah, great movie. Great movie. Highly recommend. 2 thumbs up. Elevator to the Gallows. But David, it is time for us to get our pretentious hats on for the question that's going to kind of theme up the month. So last week we were talking about, did our films feel unique to their culture? And I'd kind of like to keep elaborating on that one because we have Hiroshima Mon Amour, which takes place in Japan. It has a Japanese leading man. It's also exploring a lot of things that are not uniquely French, but does it still feel unique in its French language? Does it still feel unique of its country and culture? Same with Elevator to the Gallows. Does Elevator to the Gallows feel more like an American noir thriller film of its time, or maybe a little bit, maybe a time later, because they're very foundational of what they're doing? But do they still feel uniquely French as to what they're doing in their filmmaking? We scratch our chins and wonder.
Yes, but under the guise that I think the French New Wave is just such an influential movement that it goes on to, influence everything else we've seen. A film like Elevator to the Gallows is uniquely French, but it's, you see this kind of thing everywhere nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of thriller elements that it has. Hiroshima Mon Amour maybe is more visually inspiring to a lot of people. You don't see a lot more films like this nowadays, that's for sure. But I think that it is a little bit more uniquely French. I would be interested. I'd be interested in seeing how an American could take place of the French woman in the film, because I don't know. Maybe this is again some cynicism, but an American woman from the 50s, I feel like would just be like, well, they got what was coming to them when they were talking about Hiroshima.
It'd be a little yikes. Well, okay. If you wanted to go like low key, like, so say theoretically they made this movie now, but they made it like a period drama where they were still trying to talk about the same things. You have a gentleman who is a native Japanese man who is a survivor of Hiroshima and all this stuff, and the woman he's having an affair with is a Japanese woman from America who was in the internment camps. and you try to use that as like to bring an American element into the film, well, we could say. But then again, that's also a thing where we would have to wonder if anyone would want to remake this movie nowadays, which I don't think people want to do. But yeah.
I'm trying to set up a joke. Hold on. I just need to get the title of the movie.
You're getting ready to set up the joke here. Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, here it is. What you just pitched me is if we crossed Farewell to Manzanar with Crazy Rich Asians.
Yes. That we'll let's see that movie. I want to see that movie. But yeah, okay. So I guess back to the question I asked. So yeah, I get what you mean. So I feel like Elevator to the Gallows and is more uniquely to French like film culture, and I do agree with you that the French New Wave is so fucking foundational that anything released after it takes cues from it to a certain extent, at least for American films, because basically the Hollywood or New Hollywood, which is the American version of the French New Wave, or the big Hollywood film movement that gave us like Scorsese, Spielberg, all the famous directors we like to talk about. That's where New Hollywood comes from. And they took a lot of their cues from the French New Wave in terms of cinematic language, storytelling, acting, all that other things. So I do agree with you that it's hard to say if these movies feel uniquely French to an American audience, because so much of that stuff is kind of ripped and placed into it. It's weird. I feel Elevator to the Gallows feels more American, though, just because it feels like it's taking cues from, like, a lot of American, like, film techniques and genre. It feels like a noir film to me, right?
Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of what the French New Wave was, is that it took a lot of inspiration from the noir movement and just deconstructed it and made it into a new thing. I mean, noir was pretty formulaic. I think we're right in saying so.
Yeah.
It was very much a genre film whenever you were watching a noir of that era. And I wouldn't be surprised if these kids who aren't connected to that in any way, shape, or form, who want to make something interesting, who probably, by the way, don't have like a whole ton of film experience, wouldn't go out and just be like, let's try new things. Let's see what happens, while taking inspiration from what we've seen. And then, I mean, we're bound to get something that's transformed out of that. I was kind of thinking about this. Scorsese, you mentioned, is pretty influenced by French and Italian films, and parts of this I can see reflected in movies like Mean Streets, where they're very much personal to him, and there's all that going on, but like the thrill of those films and like the way in which he talks about love and all the characters in those films kind of very much so feels explorative, like these, where we're exploring the lives of the characters just as much as the action, albeit in a much more kind of long in the tooth way. I mean, I can't remember exactly what the runtime to Mean Streets was, but it did feel a little bit longer than an hour and a half.
I feel Mean Streets is only like 90 minutes. Maybe 2 hours?
Hour 52 minutes.
Hour 52?
About 2 hours.
Fuck me. All right.
Yeah, but I mean, we've both seen that movie, and we could see certain sequences where it's like he's trying to be poetic about the relationship between the main character and his girl. There's also ridiculous sequences, like when he accidentally gives her a seizure.
It happens.
And there's drama all throughout that film, especially leading up to the end, which I feel like certainly is where it takes its inspiration from some of these more thriller elements. But a lot of history to discuss in reviewing how these films stand up to their own cultures and to ours. But probably the most influential watch this month, I think.
Yes. Honestly, I feel like this is a good one. These were some good movies. But now, I gotta ask. So, good double feature. Do you think this is a good jumping in point for people who want to get into French films or French New Wave films in particular, and they don't want to start with the 1 and 2 films of 400 Blows and Breathless.
Yeah, because I could see how 400 Blows might be a little bit. Well, you know what I mean. It might be a little bit too hard to swallow on first watch.
It's a very long and dry film for 400 Blows, and
Yeah.
I like Truffaut. I like Truffaut over Godard, but 400 Blows is a little long and it's a little dry.
And then Breathless, I feel like, is a little bit more approachable than that. Probably has a little bit more of the elements like Elevator to the Gallows, but it's still a little bit more explorative than even that. No, I think these are. I think if you wanted to go in and understand the French New Wave movement, both the left bank and the opposite of the more. There's, again, not really a name for it.
The
so I'll leave
Cahiers
it
du
at that,
Cinema
the opposite.
people.
Yeah, I feel like these are two that would perfectly represent both of those sides at a very formative time in a movement. So I think it's a good pairing.
All right. Now, if you could only watch one this weekend, why Elevator to the Gallows?
Because it's kick-ass.
Good answer.
Because there's reason to watch. It's kind of the same reason that it's probably not quite as exciting. Same reason I would watch Reservoir Dogs in the weekend. It's just like it would get me interested for a short amount of time with some drama, and then I'd be done with it.
All right. Well, that, I think, wraps us about up here for this week of the double feature. But next week, we go a little bit farther south than France, kind of down and to the right in the boot country. We're going to Italy, which with some movies that are in English, because what did we decide to look at from Italy? Not neorealism, not any of that stuff. David, what are we watching next week?
Yeah, we decided not to make people suffer through a movie like 8½, which would really, I think, send people off the deep end as far as trying to follow a foreign film.
Just a little. I mean, that movie's fantastic, by the way. I ain't gonna talk shit about 8½. I love that movie, but I don't want to have to explain 8½to people.
Exactly. So we chose to do the Italian kind of spaghetti western movement, kind of again throughout the 60s. At the same time, or maybe a few years after these two movies we reviewed this time. A lot of people forget sometimes that the western was very much influenced by Italian filmmakers at one point, and even launched the careers of many famous people, including one. I was about to say Woody Harrelson. That's
not even close.
Clint Eastwood.
Thank you.
Oh. Yeah, I don't know why his name popped up into my head, but Clint Eastwood will be reviewing in A Fistful of Dollars,
the first
jam-packed, action-packed,
the first of the Man with No Name trilogy.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And then opposite that, we'll be doing a little bit lesser known but still famous Django.
Yes.
Which would then go on to have a sequel years later under a different director
and a different story and main character.
Yeah.
But yeah. Also, spaghetti westerns, I don't know if people want to qualify as like a cop-out, but I'm gonna be real with you all. Like, you guys don't know my father. He grew up on spaghetti westerns. Like, I know, like, Hang 'em High, Fistful of Dollars, like, Cool Plains Drifter. I know those films, like, by heart. Like, they are a genre of themselves. There's more than, like, 5 movies. There's, like, 40 of them. There's a lot more than that. This is a real, like, movement that was going on, which is kind of cool. And it'll be interesting to see how...
Yeah, there's...
Oh, go ahead. David, say something.
No, you go ahead. I was lagging.
Oh, okay,
so
cool.
I didn't
well,
hear.
The other interesting thing is that we're also going to be able to see how filmmakers of another, not only country, but culture, look at the mythology of the West. Because Westerns are a super American, like, thing. Like, yeah, because, like, the Wild West is only in America. And Westerns were the first film genre, like the first genre films ever made were Westerns. Like, The Great Train Robbery was a Western that was made in like 1900 something. So, but yeah, it's going to be really interesting to explore those and those themes and those topics next week. But David, do you want to give a little thing else for our preview of next week for Spaghetti Western?
No, I mean, that was about it. I mean, there's, going to be some uniquely Italian things you'll notice. Very much so that they were influential in introducing a different type of music to that genre that we more popularly remember today. Some of the visuals, I think, are a little bit more Italian inspired. It was much more a theme park movie to them, which is kind of ironic because that's the popular genre we have today, is a theme park genre. Yeah, I don't know. It's going to be very interesting. So in order to follow with us for next week's episode, you can follow us wherever you're listening to this: Spotify, Radio Public, Outcast, podcast streaming service of your choice, aside from Apple Music.
We're still a little salty.
You can also go to our YouTube channel, Indie Frame, if you're not watching it on this right now, and subscribe to us there. We upload this, our other podcasts, Too Obscure for TV, and as well as Dean and his Booze podcast, Film Club.
Yes, those episodes should be dropping very soon, and we should have a lot of them up very soon, so you'll have a lot of content to listen to.
Very good. Just as well, we've recently overdone the social media, so our Instagram is now DD_Double Feature Podcast. Opposite of that, you can follow us on TikTok to get a little extra content if that's of your choosing. Double Feature Pictures Show. Aside from that, is there anything else?
Other than that, I can't think of anything. David, can't wait till next week.
Au revoir.
Au revoir. Bienvenue. All right, peace.
Peace.